welcome to Choosing Acceptance podcast with your host, Marie Mason. I am here to share some success stories and tips on how to overcome your learning disability so that you can turn your talents into a career. And I love to inspire children and parents and teachers with learning disabilities to go beyond their limits so that they can make a bigger impact in the world. Schedule a call to become a guest on our show at calendly.com/Marie V. Mason. And welcome to the Choosing Acceptance podcast. I'm your host, Marie Mason, and we have a great show lined up for you, and you don't want to miss it. We're going to be sharing some great tips on how to overcome your learning disabilities and how to turn your talents into a career. So stick around for advice from people who are struggling with learning disabilities. And at the end of each episode, we will share some accessible resources to help you understand your learning disability and how to progress professionally. So, our topic today is why some of us struggle with language. Before we bring up that topic, let's talk about the top tips of the week. Last week, we discussed the 4 common learning styles and how to incorporate that in your content so that you can create more engagement in your classroom, right? That's the focus. We want to get more people involved. This week, we're going to talk about the top tips of this week. What we're going to talk about is really going to be talking about the common signs of dyslexia so that you know what to look for and recognize dyslexia in your students and what that entails, because we need to kind of have that definitive message, right? We know what specifically to find. So dyslexia is a language-based learning disability that affects the connections between the sounds that we hear, the letters and words that we see, and the meanings from from those combinations. And the meanings kind of how we process it is another way of saying it. It also makes it difficult for a person with dyslexia to understand what they read, what they spell, what they speak, what they listen to, or what they write. Notice the hand movements if you're watching the video, trying to get you all to understand with visuals, okay? But before we bring up the topic for today's show or the speaker, here's a word from one of our sponsors. We'll be right back after this commercial break. Meet Marie Mason from Charlottesville, Virginia. She is a podcast consultant for Liberty Virtual Solutions. She empowers transformation coaches who want to boost their business with podcasts by brainstorming the content and structure of their podcast. Our proven podcast roadmap will help you to develop a strategy for launching your podcast so that you can grow your business. Rebring your podcast to life at libertyvirtualsolutions.com. And welcome back to the Choosing Acceptance podcast with host Marie Mason and the speaker for today. And my background, in case you don't know it, includes being a former preschool teacher, podcast. I'm also a former admin assistant. I am currently a podcast consultant. I am a business mindset coach, a speaker, and an author. And We love to inspire adults with learning disabilities to go beyond their limits so they can make a bigger impact in the world. We want you to get out there and make a difference, right? And we share all these resources on how you can overcome your learning disability so that you can turn your talents into a career. So that is the focus of our podcast. So anyone who wants to join us as a guest, we also are looking for guests. Just want to put a plug in there. So today's topic is about the foreign learning. It's actually going to be talking about why some of us struggle with language. Because we did a really good job the last episode of talking about the 4 common learning styles and how to increase your engagement in the classroom. And this week, we're going to really talk about why is it that some people struggle with language? Because that would be a good way to get a good grasp of this so that you can recognize what some of those difficulties are. So let's start off with, we had talked earlier about dyslexia as a language-based learning disability that affects the connections between the sounds that we hear, the letters and words that we see, and the meanings or interpretations or processes, or how we process those combinations. Now, let's go into the fact that even though dyslexia isn't always obvious, it doesn't always affect your ability to read, and some people experience much milder version of that than others. And then don't forget that it doesn't mean that they're not intelligent. Dyslexia is not an IQ test. Let's dispel that myth right now, okay? Just because you have a learning disability like dyslexia, it doesn't mean you're not intelligent. In fact, quite the opposite. I have known many people who are very intelligent, but have a learning disability. They just have a different way of processing things, information, and learn how they learn. And that's okay. And this reminds you that dyslexia is a language-based learning disability, okay? And I have some 9 points on how to understand why people struggle with the topic of language and as it relates to dyslexia. And you can also relate it to other disabilities as well. So let's get started. First, how do I know if I have dyslexia? Because sometimes it's really hard to be able to recognize that you even have a problem. So, or if you are a teacher and a caregiver and a parent who are watching children, how do you recognize it in the child that you're working in? Because this is going to help you be able to relate to them better, okay, by knowing to look for. A person who has dyslexia may have trouble reading, spelling, or writing. They also have problems with comprehension and speed at which they read. Now, the symptoms are going to vary, and the severity of those symptoms from person to person, and they are going to change over time as they get older. They're going to recognize what they know is wrong when they look at something, even though they're reading it a certain way. They know it's wrong in their mind, so they have to constantly overcompensate, right? So it's going to change, and you're going to have to learn to recognize those changes too. In addition, not all the people have dyslexia are easily identified as such because their reading difficulties are so mild that they go unnoticed by general public, and even in the individuals themselves. I've heard of adults who went through most of their life not knowing they had a learning disability like dyslexia. So it's very feasible for you to go through most of your life and not realize and recognize the problem. So let's go over the common signs, okay, besides obvious ones like we talked about the subtle ones. Now we're going to talk a little more obvious ones. So for many people with dyslexia, the signs, like I said, are subtle and can go unnoticed for years. The common signs include trouble sounding out the words when reading, spelling words incorrectly, writing left to right instead of starting at the top and working down, having the hard time following along in conversations or understanding what is said on the TV shows or movies. There are so many symptoms, but these are just a few that we're going to include. And that may not be related to reading, such as other signs that you could recognize as far as dyslexia students are, or adults, is the fact that they might have poor fine motor skills, like picking up a pen, for example, and writing could be very difficult. See, I'm pretending to write. So in this case, but just to give you a visual example, that may be very problematic for some people, okay? And that would be a sign that they might have a learning disability, okay? And it might be one with a written language problem. Now, that individual does not have to have that stigma with having the learning disability. You don't have to label them as learning disabled, because I find that learning disabilities, people with learning disabilities are kind of labeled, and as such, based on whatever their learning disability is, then there's this impression that everyone has of them, oh, you can't do things. Well, I've always been given opportunities to try things, and I'm going to encourage you to give people a chance. Let them try things and let them figure things out. Because like I said, we're not stupid. We're smart. I'm not dyslexic, by the way. I have an auditory perception, and I have been misunderstood by a multitude of people, including some dear family. And it's because they don't understand what I go through on a day-to-day basis. And just like people with learning disabilities and dyslexia and other cases of learning disabilities, if you don't give people a chance, you're never going to know how far they can go, right? And that includes with overcoming their reading challenges. It is possible. And since most of learning, the written language and the learning of the language is pretty mild, it's easier to overcome. So just so you know. And here's something I will want to suggest. We need to understand that learning disabilities is something where we need to work together and address the problem, and make sure that everyone is aware of how these misunderstandings can impact so many lives each day. Like I was sharing earlier with my example, like people always misunderstood me, and it made a big impact because I took a hit in my self-image. I always thought I wasn't good enough because people would sit there and say, oh, you have this problem, so you can't do this, because they assumed you couldn't do it. Even as an adult, I had people tell me, you can't do this because of this problem. And I'm kind of like, I've got to the point where I had to say, stop it. Watch me. I'll accomplish anything I put my mind to. Anybody can. It's not about your ability, the lack of the things that you're missing. It's the determination in which you want to do something. I mean, if you want to do bad enough, you're going to learn to read, right? If you want to do it bad enough, like go ride a bike, you're going to learn how to ride a bike, right? If it's something you're really interested in, you're going to overcome those obstacles. And you're going to thrive daily, because you are going to do something to move move yourself forward in both life and business. Because let's face it, not going until you try it, so to speak. Okay. So I think I've talked about that enough. So really quickly, let's recap the rest. In the next one, number 4, how do you recognize children that are being teased in the classroom because of their learning disability? Oh, I have stories I could share. I might have to have a whole episode for that. But teasing is typically a sign of a person who's experiencing some social difficulties. And children are often geared toward teasing others to gain acceptance and attention from their peers. So bullying, for example, is a big one problem in this world, and I've seen some of that happen recently in my son's high school. When children tease others, they often do so to compensate for insecurities within themselves. In other words, a child who teases may be struggling with academically or socially and therefore uses teasing as a way to feel better about themselves and by attacking someone else's weakness. I don't find that to be a positive. I find that to be a detriment and something that's a problem, because when you pick on somebody else to make you look good, it puts them in a situation where their self-image takes a hit. And I'm more about building people up, accepting the person for who you are. And let's help you overcome your challenge by focusing on your strengths. We can still work on the challenges, but let's focus more on what you can do. Thus the motto, acceptance is a choice. I believe that we can choose to accept people's strengths and recognize what they can do not only in the classrooms, but in life in general, whether it's at the work, whether it's at home, whether it's in any area of their life. So let's be more vigilant about really focusing on people's strengths. I think we pay too much attention to their weaknesses, don't you? So let's see what you can do. Let's turn your strengths into that career, or let's turn that strength of talent into something you can showcase at school. Either way will work fine. But let's go forward. Number 5. How can a teacher handle the teasing in their learning disabled children in the classroom? Because I think this is where some of your conflicts occur, is the teasing. And sometimes I've seen it where teachers have been very good at handling it, and I have seen it the opposite. Based on how the teacher reacts is how the children are going to follow suit and how they handle situations with each other. So teachers, you set the tone. Like the mama's in the house, you set the tone in the house, okay? Whoever is the female, main person in that house, whether it could be the man, but whoever is the leader in that house, you set the tone in that house, okay? So you also set that tone in your classrooms. So teachers can be a huge help in the classroom, and here is how. They can provide encouragement and support for the children who are struggling with social skills, especially with being teased. Plus, you can teach parents about the strategies that are going to work well for the students. Don't forget to teach the students those strategies, and then create an inclusive environment where everyone feels welcomed. I think it's important that we have inclusivity where everyone feels welcomed and they don't feel judged. Okay, let's take judgment out of it. Now, in order for us to make sure that students are not teased by their classmates, we need to help them understand what it means to have dyslexia. And we should explain that it is a disability like any other, and it should be able to get a lot of help from us to overcome their difficulties. So helping people understand what a disability is and helping them overcome the children to overcome their learning difficulties. But here's a third component that I've been learning how to do in my classrooms over the 20 years I taught. It's really made a big difference. And that is teach the children how to play and interact with children with these learning disabilities. They're teasing because sometimes they're afraid of the person. Whether they subconsciously realize it or not, I don't know. Not all kids can verbalize that, right? So sometimes teasing could be maybe a form of control, like they want to be able to be on top of things. Do a buddy system and help them, give them an opportunity to know how to react, to interact with that other student. I will give an example here. I feel like it's important. I had a student who had a totally different learning disability, Tourette's syndrome, I believe. And she wasn't always the kind of kid who can talk normally. And sometimes her motor skills were pretty much lacking. So it was interesting working with her. I was a leader of the 3-year-old teacher classroom in this one particular preschool. And towards the end of my career, because I finished up not long, a few years later. And long story short, though, I was able to sit there and help these kids who were, normal kids. And I helped them and teach them and saying, they want to know, how can I play with her? They wanted to know that. 3 years old. They wanted to know, how can I play with her? How can I talk to her? How can I interact with her? So I would teach them. I said, this is how you can play with her. This is how you can interact with her. And this is how you can understand her. So we got to the point where we would say, you can read books to her. You can encourage her to play games like the pretend playing with her or other things. And you can also do art with her. You can talk to her. I mean, she may not be able to always respond like everybody else, but she can understand, right? I got them to engage with her. I don't see any other teachers doing that in that school. They would just brush her aside and let her be herself. And we had moments where she got frustrated, she'd walk away and do something in the classroom, within the classroom setting, and that's fine. We would give her space to do so. But there was times where I would encourage the kids to interact with her. And there were some and I was impressed that at 3 years old, I had kids come up and ask how can I play with her? How can I talk to her? How can I be her friend? They want to know. Most people do. The ones that are teasing don't understand how to be their friend. They don't understand how to communicate with somebody who's different than they are. Help them to understand that. And that's going to make a big difference. And it's going to reduce the number of instances of teasing. It's going to reduce the number of problems you're going to see with discipline. Okay? So this was a good, almost like a discipline talk, as well as a language talk. So number 6, we're going to try to fly by the next ones. I'm not going to give you any more examples for the rest of this talk. I really need to get through this and zip through this. I want to keep this short and sweet. Number 6, what can I do about their learning disabilities with my child, right? Learning disabilities can often be an obstacle. We just have to teach them how to overcome it. There are many ways in which to help your child to grow. For example, you may need to provide them with additional time for tests, and maybe have them untimed. I had to take untimed tests for men. That's a quick example. And that made a big difference in my test scores. Also, you may need to give them some more time for homework and provide them extra support that they need, like tutors or extra people that they need in the classroom to help them. You may need to find a combination so that they can be successful in school. And that's just another example. And it is important that we as parents do our best to advocate for our children and let them know that we will do anything we can to help them succeed. And if you can think that your child has dyslexia or has something else with another kind of learning disability, there are many resources that are available out there, and knowing what options that exist out there is going to be very helpful in helping you find out what works best for your family. Okay. I also have a child who's very gifted and talented, and I have to be his advocate. Okay. Sometimes you have to fight for your child to get the attention that they need and deserve. Okay. Because they are competing with other kids in the classroom, right? Sometimes more than we'd like. So number 7, acknowledging our struggles in finding support within our communities. It is not just a personal struggle. Dyslexia impacts our communities too. It can make it really difficult for a person with dyslexia to understand what they read, spell, speak, and listen to or write. But there are so many ways in which we could support people within our communities who have dyslexia, and also other learning disabled students as well as adults. One way is by educating ourselves on the different types of signs that could be indicating that somebody has a learning dyslexia, like we mentioned about. Then number 2 is asking questions about how you might want to find out if they have any problems reading. You might want to find out if they're having problems reading the English language, for example, or if they're speaking that language, whatever language they're speaking. And then if they're speaking a different language, that could be another sign. You might want to address that issue. So find out what it is that they were taught to read, whether it was English or another language, and then go from there. Another question you might want to ask is if somebody has had trouble remembering words, or while they were talking, or using them correctly when writing, is a good indication. And then also, these questions may help you better understand what type of support someone may have to get in order for them to find the right resources for them. So you're going to have to do some researches, which is why I have the podcast and why I have the blog post and a newsletter. I am also having a Facebook group that's going to provide you with some resources. We have a resource center, a couple of people that are in our group that have resource centers specifically for dyslexia and learning disabled students. So please reach out to them. Jen Para is one, and I'll have to introduce you to another one in another episode. I think she's coming in our December episode. So what are the resources for children with learning disabilities and dyslexia? And I gave you some places that we have access to, but here are some other options. There are so many different types of learning disabilities. It's important to know what they are, and dyslexia is the language-based learning disability that affects so many different issues. So the example that I would like to give you for resources for learning disabled students, especially those who have dyslexia, is the International Dyslexia Association. It provides information on development reading, professional development training for those who are adults, and also opportunities for conferences, tools, and other resources. The Institute of Communication and Inclusion websites have articles that are written about learning disabilities and people with communication disorders that may help you better understand and how to support them in your child in home or in the school. So those are some other resources. But also, Jen Para has a resource center for just learning disabilities, but specifically targeting dyslexia. And there are other resource centers as well that would be just Google resource centers for learning disabilities, and you could get a whole slew of those kinds of options. Last point, and then we're going to get ready to wrap up. And I do apologize if I went over. I really feel like this is an important topic to address. So, number 9, what advice is it that people with learning disabilities that are struggling with them? And if you're struggling with learning disability, this is my advice to you. If someone or know of somebody who has a learning disability, it's important to be patient with them. And if you have a learning disability, be patient with yourself. Okay? It can be very difficult to understand to be what's said in school, or even just to read words, right? But don't give up. There are ways to make your life easier, both in school and at work. So if you want to ask your teachers if they offer online classes for students who have learning difficulties, and maybe they're having trouble understanding, maybe they're trying to remember, and make sure that your online class also includes the 4 learning styles so that people can learn in different ways, so that the children can choose how they can learn best to succeed, and both in and out of the classroom. Because let's face it, you're going to need to start recording some of your classes, I think. I think 2020 taught us that that's feasible. So I think that that's something I would encourage you to do as well, is to continue having a recording. So if the kids miss assignments, for example, you can send them the recording and say, this is your homework assignment, and give them instructions verbally and written. And I think that's going to make a big difference of having less problems with the homework too as well. So there's some solutions for that. So in conclusion, the ability to read and write and communicate is essential in today's society. And there's so many things that you do to make the tasks easier for someone who has dyslexia or a learning disability, or someone who has trouble with language. If you know that that person is struggling with reading and writing, and have a talk with them and talk to them about what it is that they've written. And then it may be helpful to break it up into words into syllables, or just read the sentences one at a time. If you would just be patient when trying to teach somebody with new information and not get frustrated if the person doesn't grasp it the first time around, that would make a huge difference in how they're able to take the time and process it. You need to give people time to process that information in order to make it easier on them and a bigger impact on them. Do you have any free resources that I can share with you today? I believe that I had mentioned this earlier, but I'm going to say it again. If you need a community to belong to, we have a Facebook community. We have 2. We have Bubble Bears Books membership program, and that really is all about not just about my book, Bubble Bear Special Problem, and the ones that are coming down the road. We also have some great resources and tips to share in that particular group. We have a few people in there, and we would like to grow it with parents, teachers, and caregivers, and other members of the community who want to help and support this group. If you ever wanted to see what it was like through a dyslexic child's eyes, see what they see and experience what they experience, please go and purchase the Bubble Bears Special Problem. And it really is focusing on destigmatizing learning disabilities in order to provide a better understanding of their learning process. And it helps teach children how to overcome the fear of learning disabilities so that they can contribute their talents. By bringing awareness to how children should be treated in and out of the classroom, I encourage you to check it out. It is on Amazon, and it is in paperback currently. I will be putting it in a PDF before the end of the year, and I'm hoping to have it on bookshelves by spring. So that is pretty much the end of our show. It has been a great honor and privilege to be able to share some valuable tips with you on how your audience can grow themselves and a better understanding on learning disabilities on the Choosing Acceptance podcast. And our topic today really was on why some of us struggle with language. So I want to encourage you to take advantage of our offer with our YouTube channel. Please go and like and subscribe, and also hit that notification button so you don't miss another episode. And don't forget to check out our book on Amazon, Bubble Bears Special Problem, or join our Facebook group, Bubble Bears Books membership. It's on Facebook. We also have a Choosing Acceptance podcast on a group also on Facebook that you're welcome to check out and join. So with that, until next time, I am your host, Marie Mason from the Choosing Acceptance podcast, and saying that goodbye for now, and we cannot wait to see you next time. So here is a word from our sponsors, and have a great week, everyone. That ends this week's show, and I apologize if it took a little longer today, but there was so much information I needed to share. So enjoy, and we'll see you next time. My name is Marie Mason. I am the author of Bubble Bear Special Problem. And this book destigmatizes learning disabilities in order to provide a better understanding of their learning process. It helps children to overcome their fear of learning disabilities so that they can contribute their talents by bringing awareness to how children should be treated in and out of the classroom. If you would like more to learn about this book, then go to Amazon.com and check out Bubble Bear Special Problem by Marie Mason.